Good morning. My name is Stuart Rose. I am an adult emergency doc working at the Foothills in the Rocky View, and I'd just like to welcome you to our COVID rounds update, the first one. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is going to be recorded and it will be posted on the PLP site. And so I'm just briefly going to hand over now to Neil Collins, our Deputy Department Head, for an operational update. And I see Eddie is there as well. Hi, Eddie.
Good morning, Stuart.
All right, Neil.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much, Stuart. We're just going to provide some general comments just by way of an update. It's been kind of a busy week since we last had rounds. One of the biggest things is the region's pivot on testing. I just wanted to address that. I'll have a few other comments on PPE and care of vulnerable people, and then some important updates on admitting guidelines. So just first with regard to the testing, what happened was AHS leadership sent out an email which sort of changed the testing criteria. And what they're doing is taking their focus off discovering every single case of COVID-19 to a strategy that is meant to preserve testing materials, swabs and reagents, which they were unfortunately running low on. And then they changed the focus to protecting vulnerable populations. So you're testing healthcare workers, you're testing people in long-term care facilities and other group facilities. They were testing people who traveled and arrived between the 8th and the 12th of March, so before advice was out to self-isolate. And then hospital admissions for the purpose of cohorting COVID-19 from other patients. So those were the groups. You may have seen that email. Unfortunately, the insight information on testing criteria didn't change at the same time as the email came out. So it led to some confusion, which is still being resolved right now. But in conversations with the MOH, it's an enterprise-wide pivot in the testing strategy. One of the implications of this is that we're not going to know the total number of COVID positive cases in the community. I think in particular, community spread will probably happen without us knowing exactly what the number is, which has implications for us in the emergency department. Just on the ZIOC call this morning, and I'll talk about those implications more in a second, but the ZIOC call this morning highlighted outbreaks in long-term care facilities. So specifically Mackenzie Town, there's a big outbreak there. I think the last number I heard was 13, correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie. Some healthcare workers are affected there. There's been deaths there. And there were atypical presentations. So I know the folks at South Health Campus, I think, got the patients, but there was apparently an elderly person who turned out to be COVID positive, and the presenting symptom was just falls and weakness. So surprise, surprise, somebody in the elderly had an atypical presentation. So we just need to watch out for that. This is a big priority of AHS's to limit spread. So I would encourage in long-term care facilities. So I'd encourage everybody, if they do get patients who are in group homes, care facilities, anything where large groups congregate, then err on the side of testing for those folks. The change in us not knowing as community spread brought up issues of PPE. There were a few cases of atypical presentations, which led to healthcare workers having to be isolated because they didn't realize the patient was COVID positive, which brought up the questions about whether we should be wearing PPE for every patient interaction, including those in the parts of the emergency department that are supposed to be COVID-free. I think we all realize that any patient now could have COVID. it's difficult to provide a clear recommendation. I refer you to my memo that I sent out last evening for kind of a summary, but I really think it requires some situational awareness, and sort of using your judgment. If you do choose to wear some PPE continuously, there are some issues that, just refer to my memo. You can't touch your face mask. You can't use the phone with a face mask on. If you need to drink or take it off, you have to doff it properly so you don't expose yourself and then other people. So there's a real risk that if you're not using the PPE according to what IPNC has outlined for contact droplet with the formal donning and doffing, if you're starting to use it in an informal manner, that you could be infecting yourself and other people. So please attend to that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was admission guidelines. So Kasia Lenz has done a lot of work with the hospitalist and MTU teams. So now they're at all 4 sites, 4 adult sites. I'm not sure about the children's. There is a 1-step process for admission of COVID patients. So the algorithm will be coming out today, but basically when you enter ED consults, the first box is COVID response team. And we would like you to use that. It's very important we use that consultation box to get a consult for COVID, because it automatically, it auto-populates the inpatient list for the services that are, so that they can track their COVID patients. And so they want us to use that box. So it's great for us. We just have one physician to talk to. It's usually an MTU or an internist. We just see if they've met admission criteria. The details will be coming out, but basically hypoxia. They'll want to know some more details, and then they decide who it goes to. They decide if it goes to a hospitalist or MTU. So it's great from our point of view. So some more details will be coming out on that, but the algorithm is pretty clear. Thanks very much to Kasia for her work on that. And the last thing I just wanted to update people on was the vulnerable population. So as you know, the shelter managers are very concerned that COVID will hit the shelters and they'll have an outbreak there. There hasn't been an outbreak there yet. I think everyone from the shelters has tested negative. I'll have to check that, but I think that's the case. They are working on a plan to isolate patients with ILI. They don't have it up and running yet. I could go into the various problems that they have. It's probably not important, except to know that there are a few isolation beds at the shelter. So if you have a shelter patient that's known to use a shelter, so for example, a mustard seed patient, an alpha house patient, DI patient, so they're known there, you could try getting social work to phone the shelter and see if they have an isolation bed. There are a few around. In general, their capacity is very low, and they are going to be ramping up in coming days. They are getting a hotel to isolate these patients at, but it's a complicated process and they haven't got it up and running yet. So stay tuned for that. It's a bit frustrating right now because we are being asked to admit patients who don't have a medical reason. This is just a public health admission because they're ILI positive. They don't have a medical reason to be in hospital. They're being admitted solely for isolation. So we're stuck on that for now. We're working on it quite hard today. It's got the attention of AHS for sure. So please just be patient with that and continue that practice of admitting patients for isolation. So that's the big overview today. I'll probably be sending out another email today with the admission guidelines algorithm on it and a few other issues. So I'm going to be kind of hanging around and trying to answer some questions if they show up in the chat box. Anything else? Eddie, you want to make final comments?
No, that was excellent, Neil. Thank you. I'm good.
Thanks, Stuart.
So
hey,
thank
everyone,
you.
Just one final comment. I think Emerge is doing a fantastic job right now. I mean, we've been helped a lot by the testing centers and our volumes being low. It's been quite fun to work in the Emerges lately, just because it seems like most of the patients are there with medical problems that we can solve. we are starting to see increased volumes there, and I do think that things are picking up. We're starting to see quite a few intubations for COVID suspected patients, quite a few admissions for hypoxic patients. And I think this is the part of the pandemic that's going to start to get a little bit harder on the emergency departments. So I'll be providing some information on AHS projected numbers. They're not terrible. They'll be certainly at the upper limits of our ability to handle it if things go according to their projections. So I think we're managing quite well right now. Our PPE supplies are good, and they assure us if we continue to use them appropriately that we won't run out. And our general capacity requirements are most likely within our range of what we're capable of. So things are looking pretty good right now. Thanks to everybody for their hard work. Thanks, Stuart.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for that update. Thanks for those words. It's really great to hear. And we really appreciate everything you, Eddie, and all the leadership team are doing for us. We know how hard you are working to keep us in front.
Thanks, Stuart.
So, Aaron, can you put the next slide on? So it's been a weird week, at least for me. It's kind of, it feels like we've kind of waiting for things to get going. And as Neil said, it is starting to pick up a bit, but it generally feels, we've done a whole lot of training. And just a shout out to Gord McNeil and the SIM group. I think 135 staff Emerge Docs have gone through with all the interprofessional teams, the respiratory therapists, nurses, HCAs have in 5 days been doing process SIM. Gord's rapid cycle COVID simulation is preparing us in such a good way. So we're doing a lot of training to get going, but it's kind of like we're waiting. It's a weird. This is the objective slide from last week, and the idea that we had last week was to provide practical support for the ED staff on the front line, and then to create an opportunity for you to share experiences. And that's what we're going to continue to try and do from the working group perspective. Can we have the next slide, please, Aaron? So just the agenda, what we're going to go through quickly today is you've had the operational update. And so now some more words from me just on behalf of the working group, and then an opportunity of how we're going to get you to answer questions of the group and how to help us, a brief SEM update, and then the Wellness Hub are going to give us an update from their perspective. Next slide. So the working group met again on Tuesday, and we are all in this to continue going forward with the principles of we want to try and help provide information, clear clinical advice for frontline staff to manage a COVID patient when they hit the door. There's lots of information out there, lots of different guidelines, lots of different thoughts. Things are changing all the time. So what we're going to try and use is mainstream evidence-based and or local opinion as our source of truth for going forward. Acknowledging that things are changing constantly and that there are some things that we don't know, some things that we are not sure about, but we're going to try and update you to the fact that we're all in this together, and you're not the only person that doesn't know the exact detail of this or is aware that there may be different ways to do this. Can we have the next slide, please, Jared? So just looking back, thank you for the webinar feedback. That was truly a great team event. The working group really came together, and it was an example of people working together to create something really quickly. I'd urge you to go and check the webinar Q&A that Sean has put together. I think there's 140 questions, and Sean has done a great job of trying to get answers where there are answers, acknowledging where there are not answers because things are changing or because it's not clear. And then that's what we're going to try and do for this question and answer section as well. We may not be able to get to all to answer your questions, but we will be addressing them in the question and answer format as we go forward. Next slide, please. So looking forward, what we are going to try and do is create a 30-minute update. So grand rounds are going to start again on a virtual way next week. There'll be the normal rounds from 9 to 10. And then we're going to tag on the COVID working group and wellness update at the end of that round, so at 10 o'clock each Thursday. And it's going to take sort of the same format as what we have right now. There'll be an operational update from Neil or whoever Neil delegates to do that. Then there'll be a sort of a main topic. It's going to be Brian Weber doing airway updates next week. And then we're going to try and cover whatever important changes may have come out, infectious disease, etc., clinical pearls, lessons that we've learned from simulation and info that really need to come across to the group. We are investigating, people have asked about CME points and whether it'd be possible to claim CME points. These rounds are CME accredited, and so we think we will be able to do that. You will have to sign up for the webinars. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to hand over now to Aaron to explain how we're going to do the second part of getting you to talk and share your questions and your thoughts with us. I'd just like to, again, just thank the working group for their time and the effort that they're putting in amongst doing shifts and all the other responsibilities that they have. Aaron?
Great, thanks so much, Stuart. So yeah, like Stuart said, we had 140 some questions come through the chat and the Q&A functions at last week's rounds. And so we're going to keep that going. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can during this rounds through the chat and Q&A functions. But alternatively, if you're not watching this live, you can email questions to calgaryedcovidquestions@gmail.com, and we'll try to address them or address them at next week's rounds. And we've also started a live Google Doc at this address that you'll see on your screen. The address is also posted in the chat, and I believe we'll try and get it in the newsletter as well. It's a live document. If you haven't used Google Docs before, go to this address and request editing privileges, and I'll grant anybody privileges, and at that point you can post questions on that document. You can also answer any of the questions on there if we haven't been able to answer them. And I'll try to keep a running list of the Q&A, sort of like what Sean accomplished last week. I'll have that going for every week on this document. So I believe, yeah, there was a lot of questions last week, and I believe there will be more and more coming as we go through this. So it'll be a good repository of the things that are on people's minds. And also, we also suspect that there's a lot of people who are currently quarantined or isolated who are eager to work and eager to help out. So we've also started another live document here using Google Sheets. So again, this address is in the chat, and will be linked to the video in YouTube and will be in the newsletter. On this Google Sheet, you can sign up, put your name, email address, what your role is, and what your available dates are. So when you might be quarantined or when you might not be on shift, and some of your interests that you might want to help out with, whether it's looking up different medications, guidelines, or trying to answer questions. It's a good way to get involved and help out with any time that you might have over the next coming weeks or months. That's it for me. I'll hand it back to Stuart.
So, Aaron, just a point there from James. Just so just for the note, Sean was working last night, and he was covering the question and answer section last week so well, multitasking incredibly, and he's not with us this morning, and so some of the questions we're not going to be able to get to quite the same way, but just to know that we will be getting back to you for sure. Aaron, just a question there about the link to that document for the Google question doc not being live on this. Can we maybe send that out? How are you thinking of getting that out to the group?
I will post it in the chat right now, so everybody can see it. And then I will also put it in as a comment on the YouTube video, and I'll also see if we can get it added to the newsletter as well, so people can join throughout the week.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Just a word of thanks to the Physician Learning Program for seconding Aaron to work with us. He's going to be helping us out and is an incredible resource for getting all these things organized and getting the webinars up and running. So just a brief note now. Tom has asked us just to share these with you. The SCM changes that are going to be taking place specific to COVID, and these are what the order sets are going to look like. Tom is on this webinar, so if you have specific questions for Tom, you can direct them to him. So this is the changes that are going to take place. We're going to update the test, the isolation orders updated, and then the consult that Neil was talking about. So can you show us the next slide, please, Aaron? So now the test is a stat test that's going to be in there from March 20th. Next slide, please. The consult process that Neil was describing in his update, this is the first consult that comes up now in ED Consult. So there are some questions in the chat about whether this process should be used for ICU as well. Maybe Neil could speak to that from his understanding. I'm not sure. Neil?
Yeah, it's a good question, Bruce. I know at the Lougheed, there is a separate pager for COVID airway, and you just have to page that, and ICU wants to know about these cases right away. So it is a separate process. If you know it's obviously heading towards ICU, it's a separate process than just admitting somebody who's got a high enough CURB 65 score to be admitted. So I believe that's a separate process, but I'll confirm that.
And maybe we could get Kasia to update us on that as well.
Yeah.
If Kasia's on this webinar right now. Okay, can we have the next slide, please, Aaron? And then just the link to resources is in that process in the update as well. Next slide, please, Aaron. Okay, so we're just going to wrap that up from the working group perspective and the COVID update. Please send us your questions. We are going to try and smooth that out as much as we can so that we are onshing and trying to focus our efforts on what is important to you. That's what we would like to do. We don't want to do things that are not going to be relevant to frontline clinical staff. Please check the webinar Q&A, sign in to help, and then stay safe and wash your hands. I'm going to hand over to the wellness group now for their update.
Hi guys, thank you, Stuart. Nadim Maloney here from the Wellness Hub, and I'd like to start off by doubling down on Stuart's expression of gratitude towards the leadership on behalf of the Wellness Hub. So thanks, guys, especially Neil for your leadership in these trying times. I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience of powerful emotions that many of us might be having at this moment. Don't worry if I go a little bit too quick. I will send the handout to everybody immediately after the call. So, a few weeks ago, the realization hit me that this is a pandemic of unseen proportions, and the scale and the breadth and the fallout, of yet to come was, seemed almost unfathomable and unending. And like many of you, I was anxious. I was hoping for the best, but, inwardly and perhaps outwardly also fearing the worst. I was catastrophizing, and I began this spiral descent into my bird brain, and my amygdala was on overdrive, and I was telling people to self-isolate. I was wondering why we hadn't shut everything down already, and I was experiencing these swings of powerful emotions, and I was at the same time kind of searching for a sense of control, and it dawned on me that I've been here before, and these feelings were familiar. And it took a conversation with a close friend to actually put a name on that feeling, and that name is grief. Like many of you, I was looking forward to 2020, and now it seems like all our plans and our hopes have either been dashed or kind of paused indefinitely. And we've lost a lot. We've lost our freedom, our habits, our routines, our basic and necessary connections with other people. And we've collectively kind of lost our safety blanket. And this is happening on a micro level in our homes and also on a macro level globally. And we now rightly have fear for our families, our friends, our colleagues, and our futures. And so, in the current context of this global mess of epic proportions, we shouldn't be surprised that we're thrown for a loop. You're allowed to grieve, okay? I give you all permission to grieve. And I think we should grieve, and we need to do this because the way forward actually begins with grief. And in order to bring our best selves into our lives in and out of work, in this moment, I think the very first thing that we need to do is grieve. Or grieve. What does that look like? So, the word itself comes from 13th century French, of injustice, misfortune, calamity, of, a burden, a weighty burden, okay? Grief is primarily the experience of emotions in relation to events. So this suggests that there's an extrapersonal component to it, things that are beyond your control, but there's also an interpersonal component. It's usually broken down into 5 stages. For example, in the last 3 weeks, I went through denial. I was like, this can't be happening. I went through anger. I can't believe people's behavior. I went through profound sadness. I was bargaining. I was searching Twitter, trying to get a sense of control. And this knowledge, and in fact, the knowledge that we got from the last rounds of COVID has actually been an important way for me to achieve a sense of brackets around COVID. And I just want to let you guys know that it's okay to feel these things. I give you permission to do so. We are all superhuman. Nobody can do the stuff that we can do, but we are human, right? And humans feel stuff, and it's a necessary part of our neurobiology. And it's through the processing of these emotions that we can actually begin towards acceptance. So some important things to note: we're all wired in highly individualized ways, and we're all probably at different stages of this grief process. And we also express it in different ways. So not all of us are comfortable openly sharing, I'm afraid. Some of us use anger, some of us use humor as a language of fear, and that's okay. We just need to give each other a break and show ourselves and other people some compassion. It's also okay to bounce around. This isn't a linear process of going through denial, anger, and so forth. You can be accepting in one moment and the very next moment back to sad, okay? It's just the way it is. So grief is not only the processing of emotions. In order to do it properly, it actually takes a little bit of work. I call this grief work, okay? The Marines have a saying that the only way out is through. You can hack this acute sense of anticipatory grief, so this anxiety of, the tsunami that's coming. The most important thing to do is focus on your breathing, okay? Take a few deep breaths, try and kind of regain some control over the present moment. And Sarah will chime in on a little bit more tactical things that you can do. But the very most important pearl is when you're feeling overwhelmed, focus on your breathing, okay? In the handout, I've included a little pearls on what I call the stop mindful technique. I use this on shift whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'll put that in the handout for you guys to look at, okay? Some other important strategies are naming these emotions, okay? So you process emotions by putting a label on them. I'm feeling angry, okay? And then trying to find balance in what you're thinking, reframing things not just in the negative terms, okay? So for example, I'm feeling afraid for my life, but for every young patient that's in the ICU, you also hear stories about these 65-year-olds that just have a cold, okay? So you balance the negative with the positive, okay? The stats are in my favor, okay? I'm healthy, okay? So it's important to kind of reframe the positive parts of these comments or negative self-statements, okay? And then you can kind of negotiate with yourself, okay? What are the things that I can actually control? So for me, that's hand washing, that's wearing my PPE, that's taking things really slowly at work. And then outside of work, just focusing on my mindset, trying to stay fit and rested, okay? It's also helpful to actually list off your fears. So actually write down a list of your fears, okay? And discuss them with somebody you trust, a counselor from the physician support program, or one of the peer support members, okay? Funny thing happens when you actually list off all your fears and discuss them, they tend to lose their power over you. Expressing daily gratitude. So, you can derail a runaway amygdala just through the daily expression of gratitude. So the science shows that if you engage the prefrontal cortex, this actually helps deregulate the amygdala and increases dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin levels. So I would invite all of us to commit as we go through this process, just commit to a daily practice of beginning the day with expressing some gratitude. I read a really interesting book called Radical Acceptance by a PhD psychologist called Tara Brach, and it gave me this mind-blowing insight about grief work. So we often arrest the process of feeling powerful emotions because they seem overwhelming. But here's the thing, grief is like ripping off a Band-Aid. If you try and limit or block it, it's actually worse, okay? You actually process emotions like grief by finding the time to be alone with these emotions and actually inviting them in and experiencing them kind of like a compassionate observer. The author likens this to being at a campfire and a stranger comes to sit at your campfire and you sit with them and offer them a cup of cocoa, okay? Funny thing happens if you sit with your grief, if you welcome it in and provide a sounding board for your grief. You can give yourself insights, you can diagnose the way that why you're feeling this way and come to some inner resolution about it a lot quicker, okay? And then lastly, there's an opportunity here to move towards post-traumatic growth, okay? So like it or not, we're all on this existential journey, okay? We're not there yet, but when this is over, there's an opportunity for some real interpersonal growth, okay? And important parts about that are to be open, to be frank, in particular about your emotions, assemble a team of close friends, talk to the physician support program or the trained peers, okay? And with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Nadim. So my internet connection might be unstable. Hopefully I don't kick out on you. That's what my computer is telling me. My part of this focus on wellness kind of follows on what Nadim was talking about. What I want to talk about is making it a little bit more personal and kind of share a little bit about my experiences, especially over the last week. But in preparing to talk to you all today, I actually have been reminded quite frequently about the disaster that we went through in 2013 with the floods. And I look back to that time as actually a beginning of a journey for myself, because it really did in a lot of ways change the way that I interact with the world, the way that I view myself. And the reason for that is that I was forced into a time where I had to recognize the importance of reaching out and asking for the help and support of others. And in doing that, I actually got to receive the help and support of others. I got to actually see in real time the amazing feats that can be accomplished by groups of people working together, as opposed to what I had been more used to, which is trying to tackle big things just by myself. And through that, it's led me on a journey over the last, I guess it's been almost 7 years now, to kind of look at what the power of the interactions between people, also the power of mindset. And it's really led me to believe that one's outlook and attitude towards life and how we therefore interact with others is actually one of the most critical parts of our job. And you guys all know that. But I think in a time like now where things are heightened again, we're going through another disaster, but on a more spread out timeline, it's important to recognize that in addition to all of the things that we're doing to protect ourselves in the work setting, that how we protect ourselves and our emotions and our mindset is just as important. For instance, you guys all know that there is very clear literature linking how you view the world, your mindset, your well-being, to the functioning of your immune system. There is literature supporting that to how we actually are able to make decisions and function in the workplace. There's literature from especially simulation showing how we interact and communicate with one another also affects the decision-making that we're able to do in the moment. And so over this last week, this is going to sound exceptionally cheesy, but I've truly started thinking about PPE in two ways. Obviously, there's the more traditional way that we've been thinking, which is our personal protective equipment. And this is where you'll groan. I've literally started thinking about it also as your personal protective emotions, because it is just as critical that we focus on how we can best manage these swinging mind states that we might be having, in addition to all of the things that we're doing to keep ourselves physically safe at work. So I want to kind of go through examples from this last week where I've been able to integrate a lot of those techniques that Nadim already spoke with us about. So I'll go back to actually last week. So last week, as you know, we had our first webinar with the COVID response, which was amazing. That for me was followed by being part of the physician executive meeting, which was fantastic. And then that was followed by me going into a shift at work, which for most of the time felt like no other day, like every other day, I should say. Well, about half an hour before I was about to go to work, I get a text from my mother. She's saying that she's sending my dad over to drop some stuff off on my front porch. I'm like, great. I'm thinking I probably will just pick it up when I come home from work. As I literally am about to leave my back door, I look out the front window. I see my father's van. So I think, oh, of course, I'll just like go say hi from my front porch. I do that. I walk back into the house, and inexplicably to me, I was flooded with a wave of sadness that literally was enough to make me well up with tears. I was kind of shocked and surprised. And then I realized what had triggered that was the thought, is this going to be the last time I physically see my father? Because I'm obviously by myself in my home. And I realized in that moment that this pandemic that we're having is triggering my mind to think things that I would never normally have even a thought about. And that triggered a very powerful emotion to me. Since I was also on my way into work, I knew I had to get this under control very quickly. So I used, in that moment, 2 separate techniques. So the first one is on, like the MindShift app would be called coping cards. Some people call them cueing cards. Sometimes people call it just speaking truth to yourself. But basically in that moment, I said, Sarah, what is the truth here? And that's always my response when I have these episodes of catastrophizing or imagining a future that hasn't existed and likely won't exist. So I said, Sarah, what is the truth here? And then I went through, what is the truth here? I'm okay. My dad's okay. I'm going into work where there's a higher risk right now, but I actually don't know what exactly that risk is. I don't know exactly how this whole infection is going to be affecting us. Okay, so that was good. That helped kind of get me from in a red zone area, definitely into more yellow. I was feeling pretty good about things. Definitely wasn't at my normal green baseline. So that's when I used the second technique, which Nadim also touched on, which is empowering statements. So taking back, I just call it taking back control of what you have control over. And so I literally in my mind went through and said, okay, what are all the things that right now I can control? 1, I can control my hand washing. 2, I can control doing really good donning and doffing technique. 3, I can get some feedback from my peers when I do that to make sure I'm actually doing it properly. Thanks to Sean and Ange, who were able to do that for me on shift that day. And then you can also reach out to people and make sure that every single day you are living the life that you want to live, regardless of what's going on. So I reminded myself of those things. I'm living my life as if it could be my last every day anyways. I am reaching out to people that I care for, and I'm doing all these other things to protect myself. And between those 2 techniques, I was able to de-escalate by the time I got into my car to drive to work back to my normal baseline, which led me to be more safe and protected when I was then in the work environment. So that was one thing I experienced, but you can imagine how triggering that would be emotionally. Most people would get frustrated, angry, scared, anxious, the whole kind of gamut of highly charged emotions. So in a situation like this, most people, well, a lot of people could be triggered into their red zone, and you need to be able to de-escalate very quickly, because in a situation like that, you actually might have to be making some very critical decisions. So this would be the exact time where you want to employ tactical breathing, which of course is taught in the military. It's taught in the resiliency training that's put on by RDoc across the country for residents. And it's basically taking those slow, deep breaths, so like 3 seconds in through your nose, pause for 3 seconds at the top, exhaling for 3 seconds out your mouth, pause for 3 seconds at the bottom. And usually it takes 3 to 5 breaths like that to really help bring down your heightened emotional state. And you can really feel it. Like if you pay attention, you'll feel your heart rate coming down. You'll feel that flood of adrenaline stop rushing through you. So the goal of that is to at least get you into the yellow zone, if not ideally into the green zone, but getting you out of that heightened red state where you're not going to be at your peak performance for making good decisions, leading the team, and also staying vigilant to all of the details that we need to be more mindful of with our personal protective equipment. I would follow that, especially if you're only in the yellow zone, with what I call my positive pumping mantra. So have something developed in advance that when you're feeling a little bit uneasy, just kind of pumps up your confidence. So in that moment, I always go, Sarah, you're a highly trained, skilled doctor. You're surrounded by amazing teammates. What we're doing here is like of vital importance to our community. Your job is important. And then I'm just like, you've got this. And that kind of pump me up kind of self-talk can be really good at getting yourself back into the green zone, and actually flooding your brain with more positive statements can allow your brain to function more optimally. Finally, the last thing, if you've got it, and I would recommend that everybody has something in their phone or readily available, if you can actually have something that makes you smile, like genuinely smile or laugh in the moment, that flooding of positive energy has been shown to allow you to make better decisions as well. It also, from a physical standpoint, has been shown to decrease pain scores, so it probably is affecting our immune function as well. So Heather Patterson actually sent me this quite hilarious meme that I've been showing myself periodically through the week, because every single time I see it, I laugh. And that infusion of positiveness and happiness actually is very protective. So what I've come to learn over this week is that, one, it's going to be very normal to experience emotions that we likely don't have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. That's normal. It's to be expected. We can also know that as we move through our day-to-day experience, how we react is going to be very different, and how we react to each other is going to become that much more important even than it normally would be. You have to recognize these things and have a plan in advance for what you're going to do in that moment to get you out of the red zone, back into yellow or green, to help keep us safe in the work environment. So hopefully these little tips kind of integrated into very real world experiences will help you. There's a lot of other resources as well. And Erin, can you just switch? So there's our great peer-to-peer support team. The links for their contact information is in the newsletter. There's the Physician and Family Support Program, also phone numbers in the newsletter. We've got a Slack channel going, which has been great. The humor channel I especially like. The fitness channel is great as well. That link you can find in the newsletter. There's also a document that's been put out by WellDoc that you can find on the AHS Insight list, as well as on the department newsletter. And then two other resources that you may or may not be aware of are two apps that can actually be very helpful. One is called Headspace, and I've been told that you can actually, as a healthcare worker, get it for 3 months for free right now. The link for that is in the Slack channel. And then there's the MindShift app that's endorsed by Anxiety Canada. That's a free app, and it just can give you even further resources and ways that you can integrate these exercises as part of your training to help keep your mindset and well-being safe during this time. All right, that's all I've got for today. I think that's the end of rounds. Is that correct, Stuart?
That is, okay. That's correct. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much, everybody. Be safe, wash your hands.